The Deben is yet another East Coast delight, but in my opinion, it's still only the third best river in East Anglia. It starts with the formidable Deben Bar with its powerful back-eddying tides.
Still doing weird things, bubbling up from the surface, the power.
Then comes the bizarre shoreside architecture of Felixstowe Ferry. And there, right in the middle of the entrance, where any right-minded visitor would expect to find the channel, is the Horse Sand, which has caught many a boat. Fortunately, only a cursory knowledge of yacht architecture will tell you where the shallow moorings lie. Then I confess the Deben gets a bit dull as the seawalls close in on the estuary. It's made worse by the fact that this is the only place where the Deben's near universal 8-knot speed limit is relaxed. So it's here that the petrol heads can devote themselves to destroying the peace and quiet for other users of the river, both human and avian. Fortunately, the Deben current is still running at a fine lick, and even the slug can sweep majestically along, as long as we're travelling in the right direction, of course. The first settlement is Ramsholt, where they take speed limits very seriously. It's one of those places where a drift through the moorings is a positive pleasure. A really fine mixture of boats.
I think you know that you are not using your mooring when there's a swan grazing on the weed that's growing on the ropes. Mate, you need to get afloat.
Even the mobos are worth a second glance. Well, not all of them, of course.
Listen to this thing slurping water on its mooring. Just sucking water underneath it, which is what it's designed to do when it goes at speed. The more water gets stuffed underneath the boat, the more it planes. But when it's on a mooring, it's going...
Okay, you big fat rump-hole thing, you ugly, surging backwards and forwards. Fly bridging, too many fenders. Lovely place, and you've got that horrible thing in.
Ramsholt has a great pub and a lovely church. I put the slug on the mud beside the quay at Ramsholt, and Jill and I went ashore to explore. Well worth the trip to the church. Sadly, only with the small camera. Ramsholt Church stands alone on the ridge above the river.
Hello.
Hello.
Why is the pulpit in the middle?
Oh, well, that's
More like a chapel.
that is the style of this period, you know. It's that time when they had these, what they call box pews.
Yeah.
And that's the way they fitted in the pulpit. You know.
So a sermon's still given from the front here?
No, he still stands.
He's still in the middle, is he?
Yeah, that's right.
Wow. Oh, look, that's sociable. Yeah.
You can watch him.
And lean on the kids.
The almost round tower is a design that goes back to the days when the Vikings used to raid these shores. Such towers still stand all along the coast of Ireland. Antrim, Ardmore, Armoury, Dromiskin. They were used as a lookout, an attempt to give the locals some advance warning of the approach of a Viking raid. The tall stone structures would resonate with the bells and could be heard for miles around. Those who were fit enough would flee inland, head for the hills or the woods, driving as much stock as they could take. The rest of the village would retreat to the tower, carrying all their portable valuables with them. The Irish towers had entrances on the first or second floor. No reason to think their East Anglian cousins were any different. The villagers would have pulled up the ladder behind them and stood on the parapet watching disconsolately while the haddock-munching Scandinavian invaders laid waste to their houses. Everything of value would have been taken, and anything left would have been torched. The towers were pretty close to impregnable. Attackers would have been greeted with a hail of rocks, stones, spears and arrows dropped and fired on them from above. The Viking raids tended to involve just a couple of boatloads of men, maybe 50, sometimes fewer. So time was of the essence. It was a case of getting in, lifting what you could and getting away. So the tower only had to keep the raiders at bay for a few hours. The villages who had fled inland would have raised the alarm, and a local militia would soon be gathering strength. Nowadays, Ramsholt Church is the most tranquil place imaginable. And the weird thing is, there's no village around it. At one time, there was one, but it's gone. One of the sad things about Britain is that there often seems to be some sort of connection between tough and authoritarian landowners and beautiful scenery. The big bastards who owned the banks of the Deben had a formidable reputation. Edward Fitzgerald, Victorian travel writer and poet, said of the Deben, "Now we have a set of squires who, whether to entrench in their land for crops or their damned game, are sticking up placards of prosecution to all who travel along the river walls, which many want to do, in going from Woodbridge to the ferry at the river's mouth. We have one great squire, Tom Lyne, who keeps buying up acre after acre between the rivers Deben and Orwell to make a game preserve of it. So now, any poor man is collared by a gamekeeper after gamekeeper, even if the poor fellow has no gun in his hand. And one of those hard-nut landowners didn't like the way Ramsholt village cluttered things up and had it demolished. Nice man." By the time we returned to the boat, the tide had long gone. And I think it's worth mentioning that Ramsholt has the finest, claggiest mud yet encountered in my East Coast journey.
Ah! Oh, I see.
And there's a lot of pleasure to be had sitting on the boat and watching the life of the river unfold around you.
How many? 14, brilliant!
And towing 2 dinghies.
And once the tide returned and lifted the slug out of the mud, we had time to sample the sailing delights of the Deben. It's got a deep channel that suddenly spreads across shallow mud banks, allowing the slug to sail frighteningly close to the edge of the water.
7 foot. 7 foot 2. Look at that. 6 foot 5. 6 foot 5. 6 foot 5. Okay, I chickened out at 6 foot 5. That is unbelievable.
But it's mud. What do I have to lose? Nothing, other than my dignity.
There's a seal. Where are you, seal? Hello, seal. Yeah, hello, seal.
There's always enough water, no matter how deep your keel, and it snakes around so much that you can get a decent sail, whatever the wind is doing.
8 foot. No. 8 foot 2. Come on, tack.
At the end of the Ramsholt moorings, the estuary takes a sudden turn to starboard. It's what I came to think of as Goose Corner, and it soon became my favourite anchorage. It's late summer, so this year's crop of youngsters are still learning to fly in formation. They have to get it right though. These geese, especially the barnacles, have some formidable long-distance flights ahead of them. Staying in formation is crucial to survival, not just for navigation, but the birds get additional lift from the geese ahead. The strongest flyers take the lead, allowing the followers to benefit from their efforts. I know you shouldn't anthropomorphise, but it does seem as though the adults take the youngsters on some pretty challenging training flights, cutting close to banks of trees and flying low through the moorings. The youngsters desperately attempting to hold formation, and occasionally screwing up. You can see this lot mishandle the difficult transition from flat to glide. entertaining, inspiring and beautiful to watch. What a fine place for a sundowner in the cockpit.